And then we came to the last two subsections of this section on the war of giants, and both of these are about David, dealing with the giants. So we can talk about David killing the famous giant Goliath in 1 Samuel 17, and this is happening again, like I said, after Joshua's story. And if you want to continue at any point, let me know.
For the sake of time, I think that there's a lot of people that are going to be familiar with this, so I think that we don't need to spend a whole lot of time in this section, but I do want to highlight something when it comes to Goliath. We've already established where he comes from, when he's an offspring of the Anakim, that he's a giant, but it's his armor. And one of the things that, like what Carrie just asked about, what type of armor that were they wearing? So during the time of David, it would be after the Bronze Age, beginning of the Iron Age, which means bronze is actually old technology, right? By a couple hundred years, right? And history, like I said, I'm not as good at referencing actual articles and things like that, but you can look into it. When was the Iron Age? When was David supposedly alive? And you'll notice that the Iron Age had already started, the Bronze Age had already ended. And so you have this giant that is completely armored in bronze armor. It's an old technology. It's one of those ancient things. And bronze, the word bronze and the word used in Hebrew for bronze is fiery. And it's scale armor. So you have this connection, like mentioned here. I guess I kind of want to read it because it's really well put here. There it is. David did not just defeat some random giant that Saul and the Israelites feared. Rather, Goliath is the remnant of the Anakim that Israel was supposed to drive out of the land of Canaan. It's also important to mention that Goliath wore bronze scale armor. Shirion Kaskizim is the Hebrew word behind it. It's in 1 Samuel 17:5. You can look into it. This armor weighed over 125 pounds, implying that he was massive. And is there a connection between this and the serpent as well as Dagon, right? So you have this fiery serpent armor connected to fiery serpent. Once again, seed of the serpent, seed of the woman. And
the seraphim in the Old Testament, right?
Yes, right. So there's this ongoing motif. Once again, it's the thread. Once you know what you're looking for, you see it woven through so many different stories. So the bronze scale armor ramps up the significance as it connects Goliath with the serpent himself. Goliath was the seed of the serpent, and David was the seed of the woman. Whether Goliath was the biological offspring of the serpent through the Nephilim, or merely the spiritual offspring, there's connections with Genesis 3:15. David killed Goliath with a stone to the head, and then he cut off Goliath's head with his own sword, right? So giving a hint, projecting onto Christ, he defeats death. He defeats the giant with his own weapon. He defeats death by death. David, the seed of the woman, crushed the head of the seed of the serpent. Thus, David's defeat of Goliath is ultimately a picture of Christ conquering the devil. Now, here's something that's very interesting. At the end of, let's see, we went through that. At the end of the story, Goliath falls face down. David cuts off his head, and then there's this little verse that says, and David took Goliath's skull to Jerusalem. Now, if you know anything about where this is at in Samuel, David didn't take over Jerusalem until he was king. So he brings the skull to Jerusalem, and it's mentioned right after he kills Goliath. All right, so just to keep this in mind, Goliath from Gath, and his skull is in Jerusalem. That's a hint for something that comes later. All right, so is there anything else that you wanted to highlight with David and Goliath specifically?
Well, just the parallel with God Dagon, because the same way Goliath fell, also the statue of God Dagon in 1 Samuel 17 fell down face down,
yes,
and it lost its limbs. Right, the head was also cut off. So we see parallel between all these serpentine, demon-like, Rephaim-like, creatures, deities, giants, because they all serve the same boss, the same entity, and it's not a coincidence.
Yes.
And the same thing that in the same fashion that Joshua previously defeated Rephaim, Now David is defeating this Rephaim, and again we see this
The head has to
beautiful
be cut off.
biblical theme. They just keep continuing repeating until we see all this fulfillment through different prophets and different kings. We see all this fulfilled in Jesus and what he will do, but we're saving that for the last part of the episode.